Once again, I'd like to welcome you back to my channel, where we are going to cover the Artificer's Battlesmith discipline, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features that are gained. Battlesmiths are artificers who specialize primarily in defensive features, such as a defensive companion and mid-range healing, while gaining some additional offensive capabilities. The Battlesmith can create a steel defender who is a companion that can take part in combat situations and will obey your commands. It will be friendly to all of your other party members but will only obey your commands, but for all other intents and purposes, it's the equivalent of having a sidekick. Battlesmiths also gain the ability to use a mid-range feature that allows them to deal damage or to heal damage taken on a character of their choosing. They will make excellent midline fighters in that they can be involved in close or in range combat depending on the needs during a specific combat situation, and will regularly split their time between those two roles. And while their primary role is going to be defensive support, they can still get heavily involved in an offensive situation. This type of character will be best enjoyed by someone who loves to play a defensive style of character when it comes to combat scenarios, but will still have a good role-playing potential for other situations as they arise. So let's begin the progress of explaining the various features and spells gained through this subclass. One of the additional features that you will gain at level 3 is an additional tool proficiency, specifically with Smith's tools. And if you happen to already have that particular proficiency, you do get the chance to choose another artisan tool with which to become proficient in. So when you do acquire this particular proficiency, you'll want to make sure that you go to your abilities tab and just scroll down here and make sure you set this up to be proficient in Smith's tools. And that's all you really have to do. This way you will know that you are in fact proficient with the set of tools that you will need in order to be able to use the rest of your features. The one thing about acquiring proficiency in this particular Smith's tools is that you don't necessarily have the tools given to you unless it's being rewarded as part of a quest. You will most likely have to go through and actually purchase it. The next feature that you will gain is specific to your Battlesmith spells, and like the other Artificer classes that we have covered, you will gain these in complement with other spells that you have already gained, which means that you can choose both of these particular spells to be added to your spells tab while you have the ability to still study and prepare an X number of spells based on half of your level plus your intelligence modifier, and be able to still make use of these. And what I mean by that is that these spells in this particular table here are only limited to the number of spell slots that you actually have available to you. And in fact, this is incorrect, I should say. It should be 3 and 0 for what we have for actual spell slots. I'm not sure if I went back and corrected this in all of the previous videos, but this is what you should actually have for spell slots for a level 3 specialized character. Other than being able to actually cast these spells based on the number of available spell slots that you have, the only other limitation that you have in relation to these is when you actually acquire them. And these spells are gained when you actually level up your Battlesmith class specialization to the level indicated here in this column. So for example, 3rd level, you would gain these 2 spells here. At 5th level, you would gain these 2 spells here, and so on and so forth. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I am going to very quickly drop these 2 spells into place. And the reason I'm doing that is because of this reason. Heroism and Shield will always remain prepared. So if you recall, you have to actually prepare these spells in order to be able to use them. These 2 and any of the other spells that you take from this particular list of spells here will always be prepared. And there's a reason that's important. If you recall, an Artificer works on spellcasting based on the number of spells that they can actually have prepared in combination with the number of spell slots that they have actually gained. So this particular character can prepare 6 spells. Now at this particular point, that's 6 first level spells. That means that I can have a total of 8 spells prepared in this particular character sheet. Of those 8, only 6 of them are interchangeable, meaning that if I wanted to swap out Catapult, for example, I could do so. I could choose another first level spell and take that, or I could remove Catapult from my list and make sure I've taken a second level spell when I unlock the ability to be able to make use of second level spell slots. Heroism and Shield, you cannot do that with. They are there regardless because they don't count towards your actual number of spells that you can prepare, but they are always available to you. And that is very important to remember. So keep that in mind, and if you can, it might actually be worthwhile creating a separate section specific to your Battlesmith spells. Even though I haven't done that in the previous videos, it really comes down to how well you can track things. The next feature that you're going to be gaining will also be gained at level 3, and it is called Battle Ready. And what this does is it gives you proficiency with martial weapons. In case you aren't aware of that, there are 2 classifications when it comes to weapons. There are simple weapons and martial weapons. In this particular case, we need to add martial weapons to this list. And that allows us to use things like long swords or battle axes, etc., etc. So the more advanced, typically higher grade weaponry that you might find. One of the other aspects that you gain with this particular feature is that when you actually do acquire a magical weapon, your intelligence modifier can be used instead of your strength and dexterity modifier in relation to the attack and damage rolls. So right now, if we were to use any sword that would require our strength modifier in order to adjust its damage and attack rolls, we're not gaining any bonus. We're gaining a little bit when it comes to any weapon that has the finesse capability, because with that we could use our dexterity modifier. However, once you acquire a magic weapon, you could now make use of your intelligence modifier, which in this case is a +5 for this particular character. That is a really great ability to be able to do. Now, this particular character doesn't have a magic weapon at this particular point in time, but what you will need to do when you actually go through and get one is update that particular weapon's abilities under this particular modifier right here. So instead of having your stat be a base, you would allow your intelligence to be applied as part of your attack bonus. And as you can see here, our attack bonus has gone up. So if I set this back to base or strength, you see we have a bonus of +2. But when we set it to intelligence, you see we have a bonus of +7. That means that our intelligence modifier is now being added to our attack modifier. So I'm going to set this back to base for the time being because there is no magic component to this. The same thing can be done with the damage. You'll want to go through and simply modify this so that it is set as your intelligence stat, and it will automatically add the +5 to the damage bonus. Whereas if you leave it with the base component, which, give me a moment here, I don't want to go buy it this time. There we go. It will be no bonus because it is relying on our strength, which has no strength modifier at this point in time. And that's all you will have to do once you do acquire a magical weapon. And finally, the last feature that you gain at level 3 is your Steel Defender. And with the Steel Defender, you gain a number of useful capabilities. The first is you are now gaining a construct that will act as a party companion, but it obeys your commands and your commands alone. And while it doesn't necessarily take raw material to make, it does require you to have the actual smith's tools in place before you can actually go through and make it. When you choose to create a steel companion, you get to choose its appearance as well as whether it has 2 or 4 legs, even though the number of legs isn't going to change its statistics in any way, shape, or form. And in addition to that, there's an NPC template that you will be using in order to actually create the companion. And I will show you how to do that here in a few minutes. By default, when the Steel Defender exists, it shares your initiative, but it will always move after your turn has completed. And the reason for this is that you can potentially use a bonus action, specifically one of your bonus actions, in order to give it a command that will give it an action other than what its default action is, which is dodge. The available commands will be provided to you in the actual NPC action sheet, and when I go through and create that, I will show you what that is. If anyone casts Mending on this particular Steel Defender, it will regain 2d6 hit points, and that could be its own Mending spell, that could be your Mending spell, or it could be another party member casting that particular spell on the companion. However, if for some reason your Steel Companion has died within the last hour, you are able to make use of an action during combat or during some other form of scenario that the DM requires you to make use of action rounds. You can actually use your Smith's tools and revive the companion as long as you're within 5 feet of it. You will also need to expend a spell slot of first level or higher in order for it to actually function. Unfortunately, though, it will actually take time to revive. It takes approximately 1 minute for it to do so. It will be restored with all of its hit points, but it will be unable to do any form of action for 10 turns, or 10 rounds, I should say. However, if you choose to wait until you have completed a long rest, you will be able to recreate a new Steel Defender as long as you have your Smith's tools with you, at no cost to a spell slot or any other form of cost associated with the time it takes to create one. But if you happen to have a Steel Defender already out and available, and you go and actually try to create a new one, it will kill the first one, and your new one will sort of pop into existence. Additionally, if you are flat out killed, your Steel Companion will also die. However, if you are simply knocked unconscious, the Steel Companion will be able to, for a short period of time, make its own decisions as to how it is going to react during a combat scenario. And that is something I also wanted to point out here, is the fact that during combat, it will only make use of a dodge action unless you use a bonus action to actually give it a command, in which I've already covered a little bit earlier in this video. However, if you are incapacitated, the defender can take any action of its choice, not just a dodge. Essentially, that means that while you are still in a conscious state, it has no free will. But once you are knocked unconscious, it gains free will, but it is still restricted to the actions it has available to it. So the last thing that I have to do is show you how the Steel Defender NPC is actually created. You as the player don't get the option to do this. The Dungeon Master themselves is going to have to create it because it's only available through the DM's module rather than the player's module when it comes to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So as such, I will temporarily drag over my Dungeon Master screen just to show you what this actually is going to look like. From a DM's perspective, they're going to want to click on the NPCs tab here. And as you can see, I've already searched out the Steel Defender NPC itself, and this is actually a template. And there are a couple of things that you'll want to keep in mind. Wherever you see this plus PB is where the proficiency bonus from the player gets applied to this particular character sheet. The problem with this is that this is a read-only copy of this. If you can't actually unlock this particular NPC, if you will. So you actually have to drag and drop it inside of the MP sheet to be able to create a copy of that you can edit. So I'm going to close this and then open this up here. The player will be unable to make any modifications to the NPC sheet even after you share it with them, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So all of the required changes will need to be in place in this character sheet before you move it over. And I suppose you could theoretically make the modification after the fact, but what you're going to want to do is unlock this particular template sheet. And you do that just by left-clicking on this particular lock symbol. You can then remove the template name, and generally, I recommend putting the character's name who's going to make use of this particular character. And generally, in this case, I'm going to use Battlesmith as the example because that's the character that I'm creating on the other side. The other thing that you're going to want to do is modify these two fields here to include the bonus that is the current proficiency bonus of the player that you're going to be giving this to. And at level 3, that is +2. So in total, this becomes a +4. But you might not actually want to go through and separate that out. Sorry, combine those. You might want to keep them separate. +2. Technically, this should work, but we shall see. Now, the perception in this particular case is going to get a ×2 proficiency bonus. So in this particular case, the character is going to acquire a +4. Once that's done, just simply lock it again. All you then have to do is drag the icon associated with this NPC and actually drop it onto the character who's going to, quote unquote, have ownership of that particular NPC. And what will happen is that you will see an indication here as to who this is now shared with. And as I move this out of the way to return to the player screen, we will see that there is now a new sheet that has popped open here. Now, one thing that I have confirmed that won't work is that having the bonus set up like this will not actually work. So you'll want to make sure that you combine them in order for that to work. In theory, if I make this adjustment while that character sheet is open, let's see. It should, yeah, it automatically updates the sheet on the character side or on the player side. Now, for clarity, I'm going to simply add one thing here. I'm going to add what the original bonus was, or the original modifier was, before I actually finalize the state of this particular NPC sheet, which right now it's kind of technically done. And this will allow a roll to occur, and we should see the +4 bonus here, and same with here. We should see a +4. And all I did, even as the player, was, oh, I now have to make an athletics check? Okay, let me roll this. And all I did is double-clicked on it. And you're rolling as the actual Steel Defender NPC. So anytime you need to make use of this particular character to be able to do something with, or make a roll of, or run through and do something, you would click anywhere on here where there is a blue highlight. If you're making a saving throw or a saving check, however, or sorry, a skill check, however, other than athletics and perception, you would use these stats here. So saving throw is the S, you just click that once, or the check, which is the C, you just click that once, and it will automatically go ahead and do that. Now, this character isn't automatically going to be added to the combat tracker by you. So I'm just going to quickly update the combat tracker on the DM side, just to show you what I mean by that. So I now have the Battlesmith in with this. The Battlesmith should not be able to drag and drop that, and as you can see, it doesn't. Even if you drag the token into place, it doesn't actually create the character. The Dungeon Master will actually have to drag the NPC into place, make it visible, and it will initially be hostile, and then change its faction to be friendly. Now you should be able to make use of its features and abilities whenever its turn pops up. And because you're the only one who's going to have this character sheet shared to you, you will be the only one who can actually go through and do that. Now, as I have stated earlier, the Steel Defender has very specific actions. So if it's not going to go through and simply execute a dodge, you can actually do a force-empowered rend, which is what this attack is, or a repair, I should say, not an and, it should be an or, repair, and you can use that 3 times per day. So there is some limitation here, and I just noticed that there is a plus PB entry on each of these. So one moment. Let me make a quick modification to the character sheet to take that into account. So this should be a +2 for that, and +2 for this. And the last one is your intelligence modifier at the bottom. So if you see under the reactions, it says 1d4 plus your intelligence modifier in force damage. Well, that's going to be +5. And 5. So now this particular quote-unquote construct is ready for you to use. Anytime you have to actually make a roll for damage, for example, you would roll that and it would automatically add the 5. You could execute restore of 2d8 hit points. So if you had somebody targeted, you could theoretically heal somebody or repair them. They have to be within 5 feet of it, however. Or you can actually do some damage, depending on who you're going to attack. Now, the thing is, how do you actually do that on an NPC? Well, you may have noticed I just left-clicked that blue area and I drug it over to the combat tracker. Not sure if drug is a word, but whatever. All I have to do is drop that into place and you will see it will do the damage to that particular character. If I want to execute a heal, well, let's say I want to heal the Artificer up. They're not wounded, but they would have gained 12 hit points. And then finally is the deflect attack. So this deflect attack is a reaction. And as you recall, by default, you can actually go through and set up its reaction based on the current state of combat, utilizing your bonus action. So instead of it doing its default dodge, you can ask for it to deflect the attack. So it will set up a reaction so that that thing will actually execute a deflection rather than a dodge. If the defender is set up to actually do the deflection, it will impose disadvantage on one specific creature that it can see within 5 feet of it, provided the attack of that creature isn't against the defender. So let's say, for instance, the succubus is next to both the steel defender and the artificer, but the succubus is about to actually attack the artificer. Then the steel defenders can kick off their reaction, deflect that attack, and impose a disadvantage on the attack roll. Unfortunately, because of the way that Fantasy Grounds works, there's really no easy way to actually set up a restriction on that particular disadvantage roll. And the reason for that is if we were using an actual proper character NPC or character sheet, like a Sidekick, for example, then we might be able to set up a skill or an effect rather that would allow us to restrict where that disadvantage attack roll could apply. We can't do that when we're making use of an NPC sheet. We don't have a proper character sheet in play. So the easiest solution in this particular case is to essentially state to the Dungeon Master, if you are going to be attacking anything other than this construct during this attack, you must roll with disadvantage. And that's as complicated as it has to be. That's all you really have to do. If, however, you unintentionally close it, for example, and it's no longer inside of this combat tracker, in fact, you can't even open the character sheet through this, you can actually switch to the library and switch to play mode. You will gain access to the NPC section again, and there you will be able to gain access to the character sheet once more. The other option is you can now also drag this down to here so that as you need it, you can pop it open. And the only time anything is ever really going to change in this particular character sheet is if your character levels and happens to increase their proficiency bonus and or their intelligence modifier. And that's literally the only changes that have to be made to it until you acquire your last feature called Improved Defender. But once again, the Dungeon Master is going to have to make those adjustments. And we're not actually quite done. As you can see, we have 1 hit point here. Well, that's kind of wrong. If you look at the notes section, which is this other tab, I don't know what they call it, didn't just say other tab as opposed to notes, you will see the rules that this thing has to go through. So this is going to gain hit dice, which in this particular case does not appear to be an option we can add in the actual NPC stat sheet, if you will, from what I can see. However, we can make the modification to the number of hit points based on this calculation here. So at level 3, it will be 2 hit points plus the intelligence modifier, which for this character is 5, so that's 7, plus 5 times the level of the Artificer, which in this case is 3, so that's 15 plus 7 is 22 hit points. And that will continue to go up as your Artificer level also goes up. The next end, you can see that I've already made the adjustment there. So that takes care of that. We've already got the saving throws set up here, I do believe. So, saving throws. The Artificer's proficiency bonus needs to be added to both saving throws. Well, saving throws in this particular case is dexterity and constitution. So that's these two stats here. So we do, in fact, need to make the adjustment there. So that will become a plus 3. 3 for that, and the original was a plus 1. And then this becomes plus 4, with the original being a plus 2. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is going to increase as you yourself increase in levels. So you need to know what the original value was before you can actually add your stat block to it properly, or your proficiency bonus to it properly. Okay, so that takes care of the saving throws. The next, we've already done the skills. In relation to the senses, you'll see here that we have an actual passive perception. Well, according to this, we need to add twice the Artificer's proficiency bonus to the passive perception, which again is going to be a plus 4. So that will become a 14. And the original value was 10. There we go. Okay, that takes care of that. Add the Artificer's proficiency bonuses to the damage from the Force Empowered Rend and the healing, which we've already done. Once we get to the improved Defender section, we will be making additional adjustments. There is one thing that we're going to want to keep in mind as we level ourselves up, and that is going to be that our construct's hit points are going to increase with us. You don't have to recreate the character each time. It's going to level, quote unquote, alongside of your character. So you can actually keep this Steel Defender around indefinitely. As long as you don't die, it will remain around. At level 4, for example, we're going to want to increase the total number of hit points. Whereas at level 5, not only are we going to want to increase the total number of hit points, but we are also going to want to make modifications to any of the stat blocks that had our proficiency bonus added to it. And that means that we need to go through and add a plus 3 to the plus 2 original value. That would bring this up to a plus 5, this up to a plus 5, and this would become a plus 4, and this would become a plus 5, for example. Additionally, there's some damage points that we will now need to add into this. So 2d8 plus 3 as opposed to 2d8 plus 2. And same here for 1d8 plus 2 would become 1d8 plus 3. So that you're going to want to make sure you go through and complete that as your character levels up, and keep an eye open for when you are going to gain proficiency bonus increases. Your first one is going to be at level 5. Your next one is going to be at level 9. Your third one is going to be at level 13, and your last one is going to be at level 17. And that's when you will increase all of these stats. Your hit points will be increased every single time you level. So just keep that in mind. At level 5 is when you will acquire your extra attack feature. And what this means is that you will now gain the ability to attack twice whenever you take the attack action, unless you are under some very specific circumstances. What I mean by that is that if you are attempting to attack with a melee or ranged weapon, or even just standard fist, which I suppose would be classified as melee, you will be able to take advantage of your extra attack feature. However, if you are attempting to cast a spell, you will not be able to do so because that falls under an entirely different set of rules. Additionally, while you are undergoing a reaction, you will not be able to make use of this particular feature. An attack of opportunity, for example, can only allow you to attack once. Even if you're using an attack action, you can only attack once, and it has to be a melee attack. But that is how the extra attack ability works. It's not an overly complicated skill or feature to learn and gain a handle of. It's just a bit tricky when it comes to those reactions. So at level 9, you will acquire your Arcane Jolt feature. And this can both be offensive or healing, depending on the type of action that you're going to be taking with it. But in order for that to work, you actually have to hit a target with a magic weapon, or your steel defender has to hit a target, depending on the type of action you've given it. And there are two effects that you can sort of branch off and make the decision on, if you will. The first is that when that attack connects, you can enhance the magical energy of that attack and do an extra additional 2d6 force damage to the target in question. However, if you have a companion that happens to be in dire need, or a party member that happens to be in dire need, you can choose instead to redirect that energy to a creature or party member who is within 30 feet of you and that you can see, and heal them 2d6 hit points instead. But there is a limited number of times that you can do this, and that's based on your intelligence modifier. So this is something that we are going to want to add to our Axis tab, which is not something we've done a whole lot of thus far with this particular video. So I'm going to drag this into place, and I'm going to call this Battlesmith. Okay. And we already have the 2d6 force damage here, but we don't seem to have the healing capability. So let's go ahead and add that. So let's add a heal. And this will be a target. It will be hit points. And it is 2d6 points of damage. So we want 2 of these and drop that into place. And now that gives us the 2d6 healing. If you're unsure how I went through and quickly selected those dice, all I did is, while holding down the left mouse button over top of this particular dice and drag it away, I have now picked it up into the cursor. To add a second dice, I just simply right-click once, and that's all I had to do. And then I can drop that wherever I need it to be. And the place that you're going to drop it is literally just underneath where that little closed fist cursor is, and it will automatically apply there. Now the next thing is we need to set this up for how many times that we can actually make use of it. In this particular character's case, they can use it 5 times because they have a +5 intelligence modifier. And that's all you really have to do. Now, is it a short or a long rest? It's a long rest, so it has to remain as daily. And that's it. So now whenever you execute this particular effect, or whenever you execute this particular effect, all you do is you tick this until you have used it up a number of times to max out this last vet use, if you will, and then it will just simply go away. And that's what we want. And I'm just going to quickly clear that out of there. Okay, and that sets everything up for Arcane Jolt. At level 15 is when we're going to acquire the last feature that we're going to gain through this particular subclass. And what this feature is going to do is make a couple of improvements to features that we have already gained. The first being that the extra damage and the healing of our Arcane Jolt is going to increase to 46. So we're going to want to make a modification to this particular set of features. So instead of this being 2d6 force, it's now 46 force. And instead of 2d6 healing, it will now become 46. Now there's already 2d6 in here. All I have to do is add 2 more to it, and it will total up to 46. That takes care of that particular portion of the segment. So the next adjustment that we're going to be making is to our Steel Defender itself, in that we're going to be adding a +2 bonus to its armor class. So let me open up the Dungeon Master side here and just add the 2 points to that to give it an armor class of 17. And that takes care of this bullet point. And the last adjustment is essentially already made, because when we went through during the initial setup of this, we already made the adjustment to this particular portion of the statement, mainly because it's already there. So we don't need to really worry too much about that. And if you're curious as to what a battlesmith with their steel defender looks like, here's a perfect example of the steel defender. This creature here, the bear, is the steel defender, and this is the artificer. Now, in relation to our steel defender, for the purposes of this particular video, I have not been going through and adding in the proficiency bonuses or adding in the additional increases in hit points. So what I will do is simply update this particular steel defender to show you what it would look like at level 15. So I have gone ahead and made the adjustments. We will see that we now have 82 hit points. It has the AC 17 adjustment we'd already made. It now has a dexterity saving throw bonus of +6, a constitution dexterity saving throw of +7. It has an athletics bonus of +7, as well as a perception bonus of +10, because if you recall, we have to add 2 times, where is it here? 2 times the bonus must be added to the perception. Well, in this case, it's a +5, so that becomes +10. Our passive perception is now a 20. That means there's very little that's going to fool it. And finally, we now have an additional +5 force damage and an additional +5 hit point gain for these two abilities. We do not have to adjust this last one. That's everything that we have to adjust. And that actually completes everything that we need to do for improved defender, as well as any other leveling that we have to do specific to this particular character to bring it up to level 15, where we gained improved defender. With that, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.